Hi, I'm Lauren Espin, and this is the Optimistic Outlook podcast. Thanks for listening. Industrial employers across the country are short on skilled talent. At the same time, tens of thousands of service members leave the military every year with exactly the kind of technical and operational experience those employers are looking for. On paper, that should be an easy match. In practice, it often isn't. Part of the reason is language. Military experience doesn't always describe itself in terms a civilian hiring manager recognizes, and the credentials that would make it legible aren't always there. Siemens has been working on this problem for a long time. Through the SkillBridge transitioning program, through partners like Vets to PM, and through Expedite for Vets, a micro-credential program built to close the credential language gap. Today, I'm excited to share a conversation about veteran hiring, hosted by Kristine Irwin, who leads military talent strategy and partnerships at Siemens, with Charlie Martinez, who runs Siemens SkillBridge program nationally, and Cathy Miclat of Vets to PM. In this conversation, Kristine, Charlie, and Cathy talk about what has worked, what hasn't, and what any employer can take from it. Take a listen.
Alrighty. Thank you for joining me on the podcast. It's great to speak with both of you today. So, my first question I have is for Charlie. So, Charlie, before we talk about the program that you run, I wanted to talk to you about one thing you went through. You spent a number of years in the Air Force, and you transitioned out in 2020. Can you walk us through what that actually was like, and what you expected the job search to be, and what it actually turned out to be?
Yeah, it turned out to be a lot. I went through thinking in my transition that, I was pretty confident, had about 7 years of Air Force experience, no degree yet. But I thought I had a pretty good understanding of kind of what I could bring to the table, right? Then I got into my SkillBridge internship, realized pretty quickly that I had quite a lot to learn. My HR experience was really centered around Air Force instruction. There was always some sort of AFI or standard operating procedure to kind of follow. Here's how you do this, and here's how to execute. Very simple, right? In that experience in supporting HR programs, I hadn't necessarily been exposed to HR in the broader civilian sense. So I remember being in my SkillBridge and being exposed to certain concepts, policies, and other things, and just scratching my head and thinking, what the heck am I looking at? It was almost kind of like learning a foreign language, right? And what's funny is that at the same time, because of my military background, other people around me were probably thinking we're speaking two complete different languages, right? So it wasn't just me. I was doing two things simultaneously. I was trying to learn how civilian HR worked, while also trying to figure out how the HR experience I already had then translated into all of those sorts of environments. So I started making those connections in my head. So one example that I can think about is the concept of like military in processing, receiving new members to a new unit or a base, and then connecting that to something like, okay, got it. That's onboarding. Got it. So what else could I then make that similar connection to, right? And other sorts of concepts that I had worked in, whether it was military cycles or, employment benefits from the DoD side or anything along those lines. So some of that is probably my biggest transition or my biggest lesson from my transition is just understanding that I had more transferable experience than I realized. I kind of just wasn't formulating the right language to then express that just yet.
So obviously the experience you had in the military, right? You had an HR background in the Air Force, and you now work in recruiting, right? So can you speak uniquely to how much of that easily translated between your military and civilian roles, and how much didn't? Where did the translation break down?
Yeah, I think the translation broke down in a few different places, right? So the first obvious one was language. I had, military acronyms and jargon I was specifically referencing significantly already, and different terminology that made perfect sense to me, but not necessarily mean anything to anybody else that was trying to understand me or a hiring manager, anything along those lines. But then I think the bigger challenge was actually learning how to talk about the impact of what I had done. So in the military, you're really accustomed to talking about your job in terms of mission, process, or just a program that you're overall supporting. So when you're applying to like a civilian job, you got to kind of take a step back and then think, reflect, and understand what the heck did I actually do? What problem was I solving? Who was I supporting? What was the actual outcome? I then had to kind of just rewire how I wrote about my experience because in the military, regardless of what branch, you usually have a way of writing, right, your performance evaluations and things that you have done through the year. And it's a very specific way of writing. I could have just take that military resume and replace a few words, right? So I had to start to think differently about how I described my experience so that someone who had never worked in the Air Force or in the military could really understand that. I think that's something that I've really come to appreciate now that I'm on the recruiting side, because translation is kind of where it starts, but it doesn't simply end there. Once you get in front of a civilian employer, you have to kind of be able to speak to that experience. You have to connect what you've done to what the employer is actually looking for. Even if the connection isn't, okay, I have 5 years of doing this exact civilian job, right? Sometimes the connection even can be in the form of an aptitude. Maybe you've demonstrated that you can lead people, solve problems, operate in a complex environment, manage competing priorities, learning technical systems quickly, anything along those lines, as well as just executing a mission. Veterans, I feel like, have to be able to help see that connection when it comes to speaking to the industry of employers.
Let's get concrete about skills. When you look at the roles that Siemens and other industrial companies are hiring for in the technical side of the house, which military backgrounds map most cleanly? And I've heard you make a point that project management is a big one, but that it looks entirely different under Uncle Sam than it does in a for-profit business. Tell us a little more about that.
Yeah, I honestly think there's a lot of military backgrounds that translate well into kind of what we're doing at Siemens, particularly when you look at, technical and operational roles. But I also think one of the biggest mistakes we can make is getting very specific and trying to match military job titles directly to civilian job titles. And that's where kind of things can get funky. You have people coming out of the military from maintenance, electrical, mechanical engineering, IT, operations, leadership backgrounds, a lot of experiences that have pretty clear or direct connections to what we're already doing in Siemens or just industrial technology. We see this a lot, connecting to business areas for us specifically, smart infrastructure, buildings, or electrification and automation. And there's a plenty of other businesses that this connects with as well. Um, Sometimes the connection isn't necessarily in the job title, but it's also in the underlying skills and attitudes that that person has developed. Project management is a really good example of that. And I think it's one where we also have to be a little careful too. So what I mean by that is you'll hear a lot of transitioning service members say, "Hey, I was a project manager in the military," which in many of the cases, they've definitely performed certain aspects of project management, whether they've coordinated people, they've managed resources, timelines, perhaps requirements for stakeholders, or any other sorts of additional responsibilities. But that could also mean that they don't necessarily have the full scope of project management or the exposure of what that looks like working for a for-profit business. Because obviously the DoD is not selling a product or a service, if you will. When you're working with customers who have like signed agreements and contracts with your company, things can get a lot more granular. As a civilian project manager, you probably have, significant impact on the scope of the project that you're assigned to or working with. You're navigating customer expectations, complexities, escalations. You're looking at specific project financials. You're managing change orders as well. You're thinking about resource allocation too. You're balancing what the customer wants with what the company is contractually and financially responsible for. And that's a really big difference that a service member may not already have the exposure to, depending on maybe what they've done in the military. So I think the goal should be to say, well, or it shouldn't be to say, well, you were a military project manager, therefore, you've already done this exact civilian job. I think it's more about getting granular and asking, what aspects or parts of project management have you actually done? So whether you've managed the resources, coordinated the stakeholders, managed the timelines and requirements, or maybe you've had to do other sorts of problem solving during that process. Those are absolutely transferable. Then you've also got to be honest about the potential gaps that can be there too. Maybe you haven't managed a commercial project. Maybe you haven't owned, specific financials or dealt with change orders, and that's totally okay. The question then becomes, what foundation does this person already have, and what can they build on top of that in regards to project management? So I think that's really important for veterans to understand during the transition too. You don't necessarily have to convince an employer that you've already done 100% of the civilian job that you're looking to get yourself into. You just need to be able to clearly explain what you've done, what skills you've developed from it, and how and why those skills give you a foundation to then be successful in the roles in which you're looking at. So I think that's where the translation really becomes valuable. It's not about making your military experience sound like something it wasn't and selling a false story, right? It's about an employer understanding the experience that you actually have and recognizing where that can take you.
Cathy, wanted to follow up here with this question for you. So Vets to PM works across a lot of employers, right? Not just Siemens. From where you sit, what Charlie is describing, is that typical? What do you see going wrong most often between transitioning service members and a company that is genuinely wants to hire them?
Thank you. And yes, everything Charlie said is 100% correct and typical. Charlie is one who is super prepared all the time. And he was probably like that even when he was in the military and throughout his transition. But preparation isn't necessarily meaning that the transitioning service member isn't trying, but oftentimes they just don't know how to prepare for that company that really wants to hire them and how to showcase themselves in their best light. They're not required in the military to have a resume and to keep it updated. They don't have to interview for the next job. They have a really prescribed structure of what their next step is and the step after that, and they know what they have to do to achieve those steps, and they have to do that. But it's a lot different than going to a company and having to present yourself on paper first, get noticed, and then once they get noticed and the company wants to hire them, being able to speak and present themselves in a way that's going to help them get to that next step. Charlie touched a lot of things about that already. Another example might be when he was talking about project management and how they think of the work they do while they're in the military. It's oftentimes thinking of themselves as part of a group, as part of a team, as part of a process, and not necessarily thinking about what they do in the individual sense. And when a company's interviewing somebody and wants to hire them, they want to know, as Charlie said, what skills did you gain from the work that you were doing? What was your part in whatever the process is or whatever the job is that you did, and how did you make an impact? So, being prepared with understanding how to structure a resume, the military terminology versus civilian language, being comfortable interviewing because they haven't really had to interview, and then being able to talk about their part in the process and how they impacted whatever it is they're doing, and what specific part they played in that endeavor.
For a listener at a company that has never brought on a transitioning service member, right? They have heard of SkillBridge or know of these opportunities to do this, but they have no idea how to get involved. What does that actually take? Like, what is the real commitment, and what is the most common misconception?
There's a few common misconceptions, and a first one is that a SkillBridge intern is free labor. That it's not about getting free labor. Obviously, the person's going to be in an internship for X number of months, and they're obviously going to be doing the job, and they're being paid by the military, and that's awesome. But the misconception that it's just free labor is big, because really the reason for the program is so the military member can learn the job. So they're making an industry change. And as Charlie was saying earlier with the project management example, they've experienced, they're professionals. They've been, managing projects, doing work, etc. But they haven't necessarily been doing it in corporate America, a for-profit organization, and in your specific industry. So it's really, the free labor thing. It's really, really important that the company that's going to be hosting that intern understand that, and they be prepared. and prepare everybody who's going to manage that intern or touch that intern, so they know exactly who this person is, why they're there. Intern is intern, the title itself. Oftentimes people think of college interns where they're coming to a company and they don't have experience. That's another misconception. Even though they're called interns because the SkillBridge program calls it intern, we call them a resident because there's somebody who's got 5, 10, 20, 25 years of experience working, leading, contributing to an organization, coming up with ideas, implementing those ideas, et cetera. So it's really important that they understand the company, and everyone who communicates and participates and works with that intern is understanding they have to teach them about your company and how they can contribute to your company, as well as they've got a lot of experience they can draw on as well. And so that's really important. There's a lot of other misconceptions and ideas to make it work, but really having everyone who touches that intern understand the program and understand what this person is capable of and take it from that point forward.
Charlie, a follow-up question that I have for you. One of the things that Siemens has built here is Expedite for Vets, which is a set of micro-credentials in skills for industry. What is it, and what problem was it designed to solve that SkillBridge alone doesn't?
Yeah, so SkillBridge and Expedite for Vets, they address two different parts of transition, right? Whereas SkillBridge gives a service member the opportunity to actually get integrated into the job and apply their skills and understand maybe kind of what our industry looks like. Expedite for Vets helps address the credentialing and language gap, some of those barriers. So veterans have, oftentimes many years of technical experience, but they don't always have a civilian credential that helps an employer immediately recognize what they know and can do, right? So Expedite is actually an industry-aligned accreditation board for engineering and technology recognized micro-credential focused on real-world applications in areas like advanced manufacturing, digital engineering, automation, and infrastructure. And because it's designed to be completed online in weeks, if not maybe months, it's a much faster and more flexible pathway than going back for another traditional degree. So for me, I think that's what makes it really powerful, right? SkillBridge helps you get that experience on the civilian side of the workforce, whereas Expedite helps put an industry-recognized credential behind the skills you already have. So it's kind of adding to your resume and giving you something that kind of stands out. Most importantly, it's not just about Siemens. The credential is designed to help veterans just translate their military experience overall, and anybody can necessarily, take advantage of this for the broader industrial workforce. So it's an awesome program that we've developed here at Siemens, and we're happy to share with the industry. So now flipping this on you, Kristine, right? You own the partner side of all of this. You evaluate, military organizations you work with and bring on new ones. What have you learned about, which partnerships actually produce hires, and how does hiring, or how does a hiring team know that a partner is truly worth that investment from your standpoint?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, Charlie. And I can tell you one of the things that I've learned, probably that most valuable military partnerships aren't necessarily the ones that generate the highest volume of candidates. They're the ones that are consistently produce qualified candidates who align with our hiring needs and ultimately convert to hires. So when I evaluate a military partnership, I look at a few key factors. First, the hiring outcome. Are we seeing actual interviews, offers, and hires, not just registrants or applications? What's the quality of talent? Are there candidates aligned to our target roles, locations, and skill requirements? What about scalability, right? Can the partners support hiring across multiple functions, regions, and hiring demands? Candidate engagement. How do candidates respond? How do they stay engaged, throughout that process? And then the last component I look at too is cost versus return, right? What's the investment? What are we getting in return? So some partnerships provide the direct hiring value, while others are more focused on building long-term pipelines and brand awareness within the military community. For example, as we know through our conversation today, right? Like our SkillBridge partnership with Vets to PM has been very effective because it allows us to evaluate transitioning service members in a working environment before making full-time hiring decisions, resulting in a strong conversion outcome. Likewise, we have other partners such as Recruit Military, where we expand our reach and provide across veteran talent through sourcing tools, career fairs, and multiple military networks. So from a hiring team's perspective, a partner is worth the investment when they help solve talent challenge that traditionally sourcing channels aren't solving, right? So if a partnership is consistently delivering quality military candidate, reduces the time to fill, improves hiring outcomes, or helps us build a sustainable veteran pipeline, I think that's a strong indicator that it's really adding value to the business. Last question, and it's the one we end every episode with. What is your optimistic outlook? Charlie, when you look at where veteran hiring is headed, what makes you confident? And Cathy, what would you want listeners to do this week?
Yeah, for me, I think my optimistic outlook is that I think we're getting better at recognizing the value that veterans bring to the workforce overall. And now I feel like I've experienced this from both sides, right? I was the person transitioning out of military while trying to figure out my life and how to explain, my experience to a civilian employer. Now I'm on the opposite side, working, recruiting, and leading the SkillBridge program here at Siemens, helping veterans and employers kind of make that connection. One of the biggest things I've learned is that the translation is where it starts, but it doesn't always finish there. We have to help veterans understand how to translate their military experience into language that civilian employers understand, but we also have to help them understand how to talk about that experience once they're actually engaging with an employer. And I think we're all getting better at that. We're starting to look beyond whether someone's military job title perfectly matches a civilian job title, and instead asking, what has this person actually done and demonstrated? What aptitudes do they have that we can build off of? How do they solve problems? How do they lead? How quickly can they learn? And how does that integrate into kind of what we do and the pathways and careers that we might have to offer? Because a veteran may not have done the exact civilian job before, but they may have spent years developing the foundation to be successful in that same role. I feel like that's what kind of gives me confidence in all of the efforts and what we're doing as of late. So even when I look at my own transition, I realize now that I had a lot more to offer than I initially knew how to communicate. Now I get to see that same potential in other transitioning service members, and really thankful because I get to help them do that. So in general, I think I'm optimistic because I think the conversation is shifting. It's becoming less about, does this person's military experience look like an exact aligned fit? And now it's more about, what can this person actually do and how can we apply those skill sets here and how can we build off of that? I think if we continue moving in that direction, that we're going to unlock and continue to develop a tremendous amount of talent that employers otherwise just might overlook.
And my answer, thanks, Charlie, that was amazing. My answer, what could somebody do this week, really depends on whether it's the company or the veteran job seeker. So if it's the company, look for ways that you can increase your military hiring. And Kristine, you mentioned many of them via partnerships. Find companies that you can partner with, that you trust, that will help you with the outcomes that you're looking for, because it's hard to break into this and do it on your own. So finding, a partnership is really good. You can find companies that have job boards that specifically target transitioning military members. You can find career fairs that target specifically transitioning military members. You can find career fairs that each base puts on, and you can participate in those. There, are so many different ways to reach that population. And also to educate your talent acquisition professionals, the frontline people who are looking at the resumes. Make sure they understand when a military resume comes in. It might be a terrible resume, but if they understand a little bit better the military construct, then they may be able to siphon through that, have that conversation with the military veteran. And it really helps because every company probably has a couple of military veterans on staff. It's really helpful to get your military veterans who work for your company together with your talent acquisition staff and start having those conversations, talking about all the things Charlie talked about as a transitioning service member and the things that he did to prepare himself for his job search. And so if you're a transitioning military member or veteran or active duty military member, it's really important to be able to translate your experience It's really important to be active on LinkedIn and to have a good LinkedIn profile as you approach your job search. But it's really also important to understand that your resume and your LinkedIn profile shouldn't just be what you did in the military. You have to also connect it to what you want to do moving forward. So really understanding what you want to do moving forward, because then the reader will be able to put, in their mind, not only what you've done, what you want to do, and then what your past experience supports in that, construct, right? So that requires doing a lot of research and really understanding the positions that you're going for and really understanding your background, and then being able to show a recruiter on LinkedIn or somebody who looks at your resume, hey, I can picture you in that job. So it takes a lot of work. There's a lot of preparation, but there's also a lot of help out there. And there's a lot of companies like Siemens that really want to bring in more veterans into the fold. And as companies bring in more veterans, it becomes easier and easier as they continue to do that, and they learn along the way as well. So
Awesome. Thank you both.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of The Optimistic Outlook. Be sure to tune in for more conversations with leaders shaping technology for a better tomorrow. Please subscribe to The Optimistic Outlook wherever you listen to your podcasts, and be sure to share the podcast with a friend or colleague.